The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Today on Sales Leadership, we'll be discussing 4 techniques you can use immediately to improve sales leadership in your organization. Welcome to the webinar, everyone. My name is Andrew Winig. In a minute, I'll introduce our great guest today. First, I want to go over a few administrative things. We have a bunch of people on the call, so we've put everyone on mute. What I'd like to ask first is if you can hear my voice and see the screen, to go ahead and raise your hand. Just find a way on your control panel to raise your hand so I know that the technology is all working. Excellent, thank you. You can put your hands back down. And so since you're on mute, the best way to communicate with us during the webinar is to type your questions into your chat box there, and we will get to all the questions. We'll get to all the questions we can while we're live, and if there are ones left over, then Joe and I will definitely follow up with you afterwards. So my co-host today is sales guru Joe Rahal. Joe, welcome to the call.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone.
Great. So I've known Joe for a while now, and the more I talk to Joe, the more I am impressed with kind of his approach to leadership and to sales and to taking care of the entire organization. So it's truly exciting to have him on the webinar today to be sharing his ideas with everyone. So I'm excited to get started. So Joe, let's kick it off. So how did you? Well, actually, so as a couple more people log on, I just want to launch our first poll. So just as we get started, so I want to find out from everyone out there, how did you get started in sales? So we just fill out our first poll. Just let us know how you got started in sales. Great, thank you, everyone. And so now, as we get started, Joe, why don't you talk a little bit, how did you get started in sales?
Well, I started right out of school coaching basketball at a university in New England, a Division I university. And as time went on, what you realize is that even though you're coaching basketball and working with kids, you're constantly selling all the time. You're either trying to sell the kids into coming to school, recruiting. You're selling alumni into contributing and being part of the overall program, and you're selling to the community about participation and things of that nature. And as I continued from there as director of admissions at a private school, my job was selling the school itself to potential students and their parents, and then you start to realize that a major component of almost everything you do all the time is sales. And then what took place is when you come to that moment in time when you realize that, you become a little bit more of a student and start to study through reading and talking to other people that truly sales is just an integral part of everything we do. And it's not only selling to the outside world or the different audience that may be outside, but a major component, and I spent some time in corporate America, that the most difficult sale you make is internally to other people in the organization, trying to get them to support your efforts. So even though I didn't realize it at the time, coaching and director of admissions, I was really in sales, and have just continued that, and really look at it now as almost everything we're doing all the time has some form of sales to it.
So when did you come to that realization? When was the time that you kind of turned your thinking around and realized that everything was all about sales?
Well, when I could honestly say that I didn't look at it when I was coaching, but as I got into the role of director of admissions, and you were really out on the street, if you will, trying to recruit families. And at that time, we were trying to get people to spend between $18,000 and $20,000 to send their 8th, 9th, 10th grader to private school. You do realize at that point that you are selling. When you start separating people from that kind of money at that early age,
Sure.
and people that I became associated with outside of education, we had a lot of conversations about selling, and one of the key questions had to do, I remember, is when I asked somebody, are there natural salespeople or can you get better? And these people were professionals at what they do, and there was absolutely no question that you can get better at what you do. And I think it was at that point in time that I realized that in order to get better, you had to be more of a student of the game of sales.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And so how did you go about learning sales? What's been your approach to learning sales?
Well, I think talking to a lot of people who I've respected and seen be successful at all types of sales. Obviously reading and going to seminars, and I think the other piece is you start to teach people a skill, you start to get much better at that. So if you were to teach someone tennis, you have to understand the mechanics of it so well that now that when you put it in practice, your skills get better. So I think teaching anything helps you in that performance at a much higher level. So reading, going to seminars, talking to people, searching people out who you respect and see. And the other part of it is, even though I may be a consumer in different situations, is I watch how people try to sell me. And it's that observation that you see different skills, strengths, and weaknesses, and you try to bring things that you learn into your day-to-day and keep notes on things, ideas, keep notes on practices that you've tried, either haven't worked or have worked, and watch other people. So those have been the areas and the means by which I've tried to become better at selling.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, it's funny. I actually came on a similar path. My background is actually that I built my first computer when I was 13 years old, and I am that much of a geek. I had that little experience in sales, and the pinnacle of my computer career was when I joined a web startup. I was the 8th guy on this web startup in late 1999, and we grew the company to up to 120 people, and then shrank it back down to 20 people, and then locked the doors on our way out. And the entire time we had made 0 sales, which isn't totally fair, because we actually had gotten a check from Real Networks for about $100,000, and we were engineers, so we did the calculation, $100,000, 120 engineers. We realized that we spent more money on the party to celebrate receiving the check than the check was actually worth. And so I feel comfortable saying that we never made any sales the entire time we were in business. And it was at that time that I really vowed to myself never again to depend on other people to do the sales. It was something, as you said, Joe, it's something you can learn, and so I really set out to start learning it. And the way, my path to it was that I actually bought in on a nationwide franchise system, fish window cleaning, and I hit street cold call selling, and that was my first introduction to sales, and actually liked it. I like the cold call selling a lot better than most people do. But a couple of years in, so that was going pretty well, and a couple of years in, I ended up walked in on the Cambridge Chamber of Commerce, here in Boston, and of course I was there to sell them window cleaning. They sold me on a chamber membership. And what has happened since then, and continues to this day, is that it's been a great relationship where I've learned a lot about selling. That's really been where I've learned how to build the relationships and how to do the referral kind of work. And most of my work now, like I cold call when I have to, but I certainly prefer, as I'm sure you do, Joe, the referral kind of sales. It's nice when the referrals come in. And then I agree with you. Like I've been a student of sales all the way through. I love going to sales seminars and just being sold, because it's interesting to watch how people approach it. So
yeah, it's kind of fun being on the other side and watching how other people react.
Sure. There are sales cycles. Yeah, there were sales cycles I've been through that I really loved. There's certain things I've loved buying, and it's just fun to watch that and say, okay, well, how can I put that into the work that I'm doing? So
one of the things that I found pretty significantly is sometimes you learn quicker and faster when you see things that you don't like, because they stand out. They stand out much more than trying to figure out what it is I do like about that.
Sure. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I've definitely seen that. Great. Okay, so I'd like to, so as we launch into kind of the meat of our presentation, I'd like to launch another poll for everyone. So when we talk about sales leadership, what is that to all folks in the audience? What does sales leadership mean to you? When we talk about sales leadership, there are some options in the poll for what it means to you. Great, we've got a unanimous poll. It's all about mentoring top salespeople. That's excellent. So Joe, let's start off. So what is what does sales leadership mean to you? Like when you think about sales leadership, what does that mean to you?
Actually, the third bullet, I'm going to step back and say that I define the difference between leadership and management. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes those two terms come together in a lot of people's minds. But I draw a very clear distinction between the two. And sales leadership is really about setting a more strategic view of the organization, setting an example for the whole group, setting the vision and values, and in some cases establishing the culture. I've been in businesses where leadership has set the tone, the vision, the direction, that it turns over a lot of people. I mean, their culture is one that every 3 months or every 6 months, it's almost a new sales force. It's the leadership of the organization that I often say that the organization takes on the personality of the leader. Is it collaborative? Is it supportive? Is it clear and concise in heavy business? Or is it a social organization where accountability is something that's tossed around a lot but not often? So sales leadership to me is really taking a more strategic view of the operation, moving the business forward, and putting in place expectations, measurements, and then holding people accountable. Mm-hmm. Management, on the other side, is far more tactical, and oftentimes I say you lead people and you manage activities. And some of the things that you manage are the activities of the sales reps, making sure that administratively things get taken care of. But when you lead the organization, you're trying to take it to new heights. You're trying to take it to another level of success, hopefully. And in the components of those, I say that I put things into numerical categories. So the key for me, in order to be a good leader, are things like commitment and conviction to the direction you're setting, confidence, because if you don't display that level of confidence and you try to be somebody you're not, people see through it and you lose that organization. Sure. Courage to be a good leader, because sometimes you have to challenge the establishment above you and hold steady to really what you're trying to achieve. The opposite of that is every month it's a new idea, a new flavor of the month, whereas the courage to hold true to something, the courage to break out of the box and try something different and set a new course. And then I came up with this last one because I was the victim of it. When I had a leader and a manager, they became more of a challenge to me than the job itself. So from a leadership standpoint, the leaders should not be the challenge, but they should challenge others to do better. And then part of the courage in that is to, I think, as leadership characteristics is you have to be able to challenge the status quo.
Right.
Organizations don't move forward unless something is challenged. That's the leadership component.
Can you give us an example of an organization where you saw this kind of leadership, where someone challenged the status quo?
There was an organization that I worked with in Omaha where they were going down a path that was consistent with the industry, and what they ended up doing is really looking at their own business, looking at their own marketplace, looking at their own strengths and weaknesses, and they were willing to really make some very tough decisions in terms of what that direction was going to be for them. It required a hit on revenue for the first month or two, but they blew through that because they were ready to make. They challenged what was sort of the norm. One of the specific things is you can look at your database and say who's making money for you and who is not. And it's very difficult to identify that, and I don't want to say fire clients, but have a different kind of relationship and conversation because that's not the norm. That's breaking out. That's challenging the status quo. And finding out who are the people that either are making money for you or who should be making money for you but aren't, and finding out why not, and then making the corrective action. That's an example of challenging that status quo.
And so you view that as a leadership kind of thing, saying, okay, well, some clients aren't profitable, and so what are we going to do to kind of fix that or to find more profitable clients, that sort of thing?
Right. And the same could be said about another scenario where it wasn't a list of clients, but it was a segment of the market. It was SIC codes, and they felt that the industry was chasing, just use an example, banks. Well, there was a whole nother application for their service, and they were willing to step out and break into that new marketplace. And so that's another example of being strategic, taking a look at something, having the courage and the confidence to lead that to another direction.
Excellent. Great. Well, thank you. So I want to make sure we get into our program here. What we've promised is 4 tips you can use immediately to improve sales leadership. And so Joe, when you kind of moving into our first tip, when you talk about leadership and sales, kind of what's the first thing that comes to mind to you as a tip to help people improve their leadership?
I think understanding the job itself.
Okay.
Both in whatever the capacity, if you're a leader, if you're a manager, if you're a salesperson, you really first and foremost have to know what your job is, what the expectations are of that position, and then you can't move forward, you can't make change, you can't implement the things I just talked about unless you really know who you are and what is that job and what are the requirements of that position. So,
can you give us examples of kind of,
go ahead.
Yeah. So can you give us an example kind of what people, when knowing your job, most people are like, well, I kind of know my job. Can you give an example of how people might think they know their job, but actually knowing their job in more detail would be helpful in this way?
Sure. From a sales management standpoint, because it's a very easy example, oftentimes people think that their role is to help their salespeople improve. But people often don't understand what that necessitates. For instance, how much time in actual live interactions do you spend with your sales rep with a client? How much time in the field do you spend? A lot of sales managers and sales leaders feel that their time is 95% spent in the office, in a conference room, doing administrative things. Understanding what your job is and what those critical components are, what the priorities. I find that the successful people know that, and in some cases, and as an example, they're spending at least 25% in the field, mixing it up with clients in the business world, and not administratively 95% behind a desk. Those are kinds of activities. And the other piece of that is it's human nature. We end up following the path of least resistance. We go where we are most comfortable, not necessarily where the important things are. And so once you know what is the job, what are the expectations, what are your goals and measurements, and then structuring what you do and prioritizing those activities around those priorities and what's expected. And if you have deficiencies in some of those areas that you should be working more time in, then get the help that you need. That's a component of sales leadership, having the courage to say, I need help here or I need help there, and rely on other people, delegate. If you have a peer or you have someone that reports to you that's very strong and very competent in an area where you may not be, let that person grow themselves by relying on that person's expertise. So those are some of the examples about knowing who you are, knowing what's expected of you, and then going forward. I see your slide is perfect.
So we're saying it's from a kind of management leadership point of view, that, and we're talking about kind of the manager leader's job, right? That
right.
It's really being clear that maybe more of your job is mentoring. You know, it's not so much filling out the sales reports, but actually helping out with mentoring your team and improving everyone's performance. Is that the kind of thing that you're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. I often use a chart that's upside down, just like many people put the client at the very top. But even though on paper, informally, someone may report to me, my job is to make them successful. So on a very practical level, I'm going to do what I can to help them. So I'm really working for them. That's a strategy. That's a frame of mind that I find is very successful in sales leadership, because in sales leadership, oftentimes you have other sales managers reporting to you. Sometimes a sales leader and a sales manager are the same person. It's, again, understanding what those roles are and what the functions are to make that work. But understanding your job is to help other people perform well and better. Yeah, becomes an important component of sales leadership.
Interesting. Cool. So I want to actually take that segue. So what we've been talking about here, our first tip is kind of what's your job, and Joe, I think it's a great tip for people to kind of be aware of the mentoring side of it. And what I'd like to do now is kind of segue into our second tip, which is the delegation is teaching. A lot of the work that I do is teaching people how to delegate, and I'd actually like to give kind of a little background and tell a quick story about how I've seen this playing out. The interesting thing to me about delegating is that in our schools today, there's a particular word we use when we talk about teamwork. You know, we call teamwork cheating. It's cheating. You know, if they catch you working together on tests or problem sets or exams, you get in trouble and they throw you out. So it's no wonder that, you know, when salespeople get out into the world, you know, you kind of learn how to sell and you learn all those techniques and strategies to sell. And then you get promoted into this kind of management role, and your job is no longer to sell, right? Your job is really, as we've been talking about, Joe, your job is more to mentor. That shift, it's just a shift in skill set, right? I mean, it's the kind of thing that it's not taught in our schools, and in fact, we're not taught how to kind of build that trust and how to make sure that other people are working. And so, the story I like to tell is actually of a salesperson I worked with several years ago in the window cleaning business, and there was, we were out. She had been pretty well trained by the time I was working with her, but I still went out for a day with her, and we were walking down the street, bidding glass, and at one point I had to take a phone call, so I stepped away, and while I was away, she, got someone to request a bid, and she went in and wrote up the bid and handed in the estimate. And she'd actually counted the glass wrong. It's the kind of thing you would have expected her to have known that already, because she started with us for a few weeks, but still she hadn't counted it right. And so I took the opportunity. I said, awesome. I said, that's a great mistake that you just made. You took the initiative. I love the fact that you took the initiative and went and did this. Went and did the bid. I said, but there was something wrong with the count, so let's go over that. So we went over the count, kind of cleaned that up. And she said, I'll go change it. I said, no. I said, it's not that big a deal. I said, but just, I just want to make sure, again, it was an opportunity to make sure she was trained correctly. And so we continued on with our day, and later in the day, I had to take another call. So stepped away, and the same thing happened. She wrote up a bid and submitted it. And this time she had counted everything perfectly. She had just forgotten to add the multiplier. So the glass count does not equal the price. And she had just done the glass count as the price. It was actually a multiplier. You need to put it through. So I said, wow, I said, congratulations. That's your second good mistake today. I said, this time you got the glass count right, but you forgot to do the multiplier. And so we continued on our day. And on the way home, I said, so you made two good mistakes today. You counted the glass wrong, but then we fixed that, and you put in the wrong bid, and you fixed that. And it was funny because when we got back to the office, she was working for a little while, and then she came over to me. She said, so remind me, she said, what were the two mistakes that I made, and why was that a good thing? and Joe, when I talk about leadership, I really celebrate mistakes. One of the big things I like to talk about, and I put it here in the context of creating that kind of learning environment for people, right? That you're out on the street with people, and you're giving them the opportunity to fail a little bit, to make those mistakes, because I would have assumed that she knew how to count glass. Kind of thing. I would have assumed that was something she knew how to do, but she wasn't quite clear on it yet. And so I think that when you get to that point, a lot of people get frustrated. I don't believe they don't know it yet, but we forget how long it took us to learn the same kind of thing. And so the model I like to, when I talk about delegating and I talk about these kind of management things, I like to talk about kind of your first golf lesson. How can you make it really easy for people to get early successes, right? When you're delegating to someone, your job is to teach them, and what can you set up so that you're really moving things forward and really letting them build on their success and think through that way. And I think it's from the coaching work that I do, I've noticed I don't think people tend to think in this way, and it's really a tip that I like to give people as they're looking at their kind of leadership capabilities. What is your approach to teaching? Right, when you're running this organization, you got a direction that you're setting, and what is your approach to teaching? So I think that's kind of a key thing. I'll also say that when people talk about delegating, there's this whole sense that you're sitting back. I delegated everything, got nothing left to do. I'm just here. But what I like to say to people is that delegating actually starts when the work doesn't get done. Right? If you delegate stuff and stuff gets done, then you're not really delegating. That the work of delegating is when work doesn't get done. What do you do to make the work get done? And so to me, delegating isn't so much about sitting back and doing nothing. Delegating to me is much more about kind of the one-on-one work that you're doing with people, the personal connections you're making and the training that you're doing to help people get better, as Joe, as you were talking about, kind of that step-by-step approach to helping people grow, to finding out their skills and teaching them the skills that they need. Joe, do you want to add anything else to the kind of delegation?
Yeah, I often use a word when in delegating is you have to inspect what you expect. Delegating is not getting rid of the things that you don't want to do.
Right.
And a lot of people think that's what delegating is.
Sure.
I think without delegating, your organization doesn't grow because people then are only doing the little things that they're told to do.
Right.
And when I mention challenge the status quo, I don't think you can challenge the status quo without delegating, because otherwise you're going to get mired in minutia. But when you do delegate, you have to inspect what you expect, and that includes clear communication up front of what it is you expect. And like you said a minute ago, don't assume people know how to count glass. Some people just, they don't. So that, I just add that. That's a phrase I like to use.
And the interesting thing was, I mean, she had already kind of gone through our training program, so I would have, I wouldn't have expected her to know it when she came, but I certainly would have expected her to have gotten that through her training. And and it takes multiple times for us to learn stuff, right? As human beings, like it's not a one, anything you teach, it's never a one-shot deal. And so I like to work with leaders on just kind of thinking about that. So thank you for that perspective on it, Joe. That's excellent. So the second tip we've talked about is that delegating is teaching. So as we talk about learning your job, and a lot of the knowing your job stuff ends up being delegating kind of work. How you mentor people, how you kind of train salespeople, and so the idea that it's teaching is really helpful. So what I want to do now is pause for just about 30 seconds. And we've gone through two things now: the what's your job and the delegating is teaching. And if you got a piece of paper around or something, I'd like just to give you 30 seconds to kind of think about how this affects what you're doing right now. So just take a minute and write down kind of in your world, what are the aspects of your job maybe that you're not thinking about, and where are your teaching opportunities? As you go to improve sales leadership in your organization, what are some of those opportunities? So Joe and I'll just be quiet for about 30 seconds. Let's think about that, write something down, and then we'll continue. All right, great work, everyone. Let's continue. So as we're getting into our third tip, I'm going to launch another poll. So this poll is, whose side are you on? So tell me, from your point of view, kind of, whose side are you on in this whole management, leadership, sales kind of thing? Great. We're pretty well split between management and leadership, so I think that feeds well into our next point, Joe. So let's talk about. So our next tip, I think, is choose side, right? So Joe, why don't you talk a little bit about what we mean when we talk about choose sides as kind of a technique for improving your leadership.
You had mentioned just a minute ago about making sure as a leader, as a delegator, that I think your term was you want someone to have early success. Mm-hmm. What you want to do is ensure people are successful. I mean, that's the objective when you bring new people on, you put them in a new job. Oftentimes people fail not because they want to, and I'm going to say that's probably 99% of the time. Right. The majority of the reasons people fail is either poor communication and they've been put into a job that they're really not suited to. Mm-hmm. And I had a conversation with someone recently. They were looking to promote from within, and they wanted to, they needed somebody really in a general management role, a leadership role. And they were talking about promoting somebody that was really a more administrative, skill-based person. And so choosing sides has two perspectives. One, as an individual, you have to choose sides, and that's very much tied in with the first point we made. You've got to know your strengths and know who you are, as well as knowing what the job requires. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes the reason people don't succeed is because they're being asked to do something that is not within their core competencies. In some cases, people aspire to a position because it's glamorous, the money is good, but what happens is when they find themselves not successful, they'd give anything not to be there. They'll challenge their own and their own decision. So choosing sides really says, who are you? Where are your strengths and weaknesses? And how do they match up with the requirements of the position? And as a leader, you have to be honest with yourself in the business to make sure that you're not guilty of both those situations. And when I say both those situations, A, putting somebody in a position where they're not going to be successful, and B, not knowing what that job really needs for skills and not understanding that position, and then along the same token really being honest and understand what that individual is. So choosing sides means, as much as anything, being honest and knowing where your strengths lie. There is a big difference between management and leadership. And sometimes the twain shall never meet. And, and style has something to do with it, too. Go ahead, Andy.
Sure. Well, I think that, I mean, I know that in the work that I do, I mean, I'm careful to point out to people that I don't have a particular view of who people should be as a leader, right? I mean, I don't think everyone should be the CEO of a company. I don't think everyone should be an entrepreneur, right? My approach is really to help people learn the skills that help them be the right kind of leader that they want to be. And so certainly, if you're an excellent manager, that is an excellent form of leadership. And so I just wanted to check in with you, Joe, that I think you're kind of suggesting that, you know, we're talking about sales leadership here, but one of the things you can be really strong at is management. And if you're strong at management, I think what you're suggesting is you should go with management, right? Is that kind of a fair?
And I'm even going to back it up a step.
Yep.
Just because you're a very good salesperson or you have a very good salesperson working for you, it doesn't mean that they are going to be a good manager or leader. So exactly what you said, but I add the piece with salespeople that oftentimes the best salespeople don't make very good managers, and they make even worse leaders. And so you do see that working its way through the system as well.
Gotcha. So you sometimes work with people on kind of determining whether someone's got the right kind of, you know, aptitude for the management job. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, management is about working with people. I tell people managing people is tough. And you have to be the person to adapt when you manage. And so if you can't adapt, if you're going to be narrow in your thinking and this is the only way, then I think management's going to be very difficult. Likewise, if you're not a little bit of a visionary, if you're not someone who can look beyond exactly what's there today and challenge the status quo, you may not be a good leader. And that's okay, because what you want to do is be successful wherever you are, and that's the key.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I worked with a guy back in my computer days who every time I went on vacation, he covered the team for me. So it was his job to go to the daily meetings and kind of prioritize the bugs and kind of make sure things got done. And he was excellent at it. I mean, I had wonderful vacations because I knew that he was taking care of the whole thing, and he had absolutely zero interest in moving up the chain. Right. He did not want to manage. And so every review period, I wrote, his name was also Andy. I wrote, Andy does an excellent job with the project management side of things, but it's indicated that he has no interest in this, and so, he continues to be an excellent senior developer. And you could see the kind of look of relaxation on his face every time he read this, that I was not forcing him to be a manager, right? It's the kind of thing he was happy to cover it for a week, happy to cover it for 2 weeks, but he did not want and he was great at it, but no interest in kind of the more responsibility. So.
Yeah,
and I think that's leadership as well, right? Just knowing kind of when to push people and when not, right? That's really
right, exactly. It's got to be success for everybody, or it doesn't work.
Right. Excellent. So Right. So the third thing we talked about is huge size, and thank you, Joe. I think it's a great description of kind of knowing what your strengths are and playing to your strengths, and and building up an organization that kind of helps out with that. So we've gone through 3 tips now. We've got 1 tip left, and as we go into that, I'm going to launch a poll now. I'm going to ask you to kind of talk about. We're going to talk a little bit now about kind of learning, like your approach to learning. And so what I'd like to ask is, what is the best technique for you, personally, when you think about the way that you learn? What is the best way for you to learn? Great. Yes. So thank you, everyone, for your feedback. And as always, it's split between books, training sessions, and coaching. And it's one of those things from a leadership point of view. That's kind of what I expect to see, that everyone learns a different way, and it's important, kind of whether you're a manager or a leader, a way of being a good leader is kind of understanding your learning model. And our 4th tip today is called swing the bat. And I want to motivate that by a quick baseball story, because I'm a big baseball fan. I played baseball all my life. I'm actually more into softball now because, softball I can still be a hero. It's harder to keep up with the baseball game these days. But in about several years ago, I was playing softball, and I've always been a pretty good softball player, but I wasn't happy with the way I was swinging the bat. I wasn't happy with the way I was hitting the ball. I had, without getting too detailed about it, I had power where you wouldn't have expected me to have power based on, how I bat and everything. And so I actually went and took a class. I paid $35 up at the Ironwood batting cages in Woburn here, and the guy spent 45 minutes with me. And what happened was he taught me 3 things that I needed to think about when I was swinging the bat. And it was that you flick the bat through the zone, you turn your hips a certain way, there's a particular way you shift your weight. And so it was those 3 things. And so in the 45 minutes, we practiced, he kind of watched me, and then we kind of practiced this new way. And what happened was, for the next 18 months, which sounds like a long time, it was only 2 seasons. But for the next 18 months, I hit horribly. I really took a gigantic step backwards in my hitting ability, because with these new techniques, I wasn't sure which pitches I was looking at. I was getting used to different pitches and different kind of power zones, and so it just took me a while. And over the course of that time, I probably took about 500 pitches at the batting cages. I go up there and take 100 pitches at a time, a bunch of times. And when I did the calculation, I realized that over the course of a softball season, I probably see about 30 to 35 pitches. Right, taking 500 pitches was really an incredible way of getting better at this. And the cool thing that happened was, after I'd gone through those 18 months, I started hitting a lot of home runs. I started hitting a home run every game. As a baseball player, I expected a home run every at bat. But the really cool thing was that if I didn't hit the ball the way I wanted to, I now knew why. Right, in the past, I had always been kind of guessing. I wonder if I did that, or what. I just kind of swing wildly but not know what had happened. But once I knew that I was trying to flick the bat through the zone and move my hips a certain way and shift my weight at a certain time, I could really tune it for myself. That if I went up there and didn't do what I wanted to do, I could learn kind of what it was that I wanted to be doing. And and Joe, I'm sure you work on this as well. But a lot of the work that I do with people is in trying new things. And whether you're leading or managing, the act of sales and the act of, we talked earlier about improvement. How do you kind of learn sales? How do you kind of improve? And I think there's a really important aspect of just swinging, just giving it a try, right? That you read a book and you see a new technique, and of course that's not helpful unless you actually go out and try it. And it doesn't usually take 18 months to get a new sales technique in place, but I think it is important to be willing to try stuff and to be willing to be bad at it. One of the quotes that I love is that something's got to be important enough that you want to be bad at it, because that's where you always start off, right? You always start off not being as good. And I know for me it was a very frustrating time in softball not being able to hit, because I like hitting. I'm used to being a good hitter, but it was in the service of becoming better. And I think, Joe, you had talked earlier about a sales organization that did that. It took about a 2-month revenue hit, to really get much better on the other end of that. And so I think that this tip that I'm talking about really plays to that. You know, the idea of knowing how you learn, knowing kind of what your approach is, and being willing to go out there and try something. You know, go out there and actually swing the bat. So Joe, did you have comments you wanted to make on that?
Yeah, a couple of them. When you talk about the mechanics, and we talked earlier about being a student of sales, you do have to break everything down, whether it's hitting, whether it's golf, whether it's sales, and I guess that gets into the process part of sales and leadership. But I work with an 8-step sales process. So you have to be able to understand those mechanics so that you can learn. Whatever your learning style is, if it's listening, but you have a foundation of 8 steps to selling or 8 components to sales management, which I work with a lot of companies on, that's how you become a student of the career and profession that we all find ourselves in. By the way, there's a great book called The Accidental Salesperson, because we are all in the business really accidentally. So I highly recommend that to people. But it's when you do understand how you learn, you need a foundation from which to improve, which is that process. And that's how you become a student of the game, if you will. And then from the leadership standpoint, in the management standpoint, it's incumbent upon you, the leader or the manager, to adapt, not expect the student to adapt to you. That's really kind of an old school. But if you want success down the road and win-win, then you have to be adaptive to that other person. So you have to be skilled in helping people learn, whether it's giving them a book, whether it's showing them, whether it's doing role plays and demonstrations. As a manager and a leader, you need to have all those arrows in your quiver to make the organization successful. Because ultimately that's the objective of a leader and a manager, is to make the organization successful. And in order to do that, the players have to improve. Well, that's that inverse pyramid that I use, where even though on paper the salesperson reports to the manager reports to the vice president of sales, in order to make it work, it has to be flipped upside down. So in terms of swinging the bat, and I'll give everyone a way to try that without having a huge impact. Go bowling someday and bowl with your opposite hand. I did this with a sales organization. Really? And it was interesting. After the 3rd string, people have never bowled with their opposite hand. Right. After the 3rd string, after the 3rd time they had done it, the scores kept going up and up and up with their opposite hand. And it only tells you that if you try something new and keep at it, and you have a foundation, which is a process by which then improvement does take place. So that's more than a few things, Andy. Sorry.
No, thank you, Joe. That's a great. That's a great. I love that bowling example. What an incredibly powerful idea for. Because I know that I've tried to swing the bat, lefty, and it's horrible. Like it's amazing. It's amazing how I have no power from the left side.
But if mechanically you follow the same principles, I'm sure over time you'd get better.
Oh, I most certainly would. Yes, no doubt that is the case. That's great. Awesome. Okay, so the fourth tip we talked about today is swing the bat. So what I want to do now is pause and put up another poll. So we've talked about 4 tips today, and what I'd like to ask everyone on the call is to let us know kind of which tip you found to be the most valuable in kind of your work. So I'm going to launch our final poll now. just let us know, kind of, what's your job? Delegating is teaching two sides just from the bat. Which do you feel is kind of most interesting to you from where you are in your sales leadership journey? Excellent. Thank you, everyone, as always, for your feedback. And speaking of feedback, we do, Joe and I appreciate you being on the call. You know, as many of you know, I do a leadership lunch webinar series that have a lot of these, and so we're always looking for your feedback. So a survey will pop up when we're done with this webinar. So I'd like to ask, you know, please give us your feedback. We are interested in what you think and what kinds of stuff we can do to help you out in the future. So once again, please do fill out the survey for us. We do read them and are interested in your feedback. So we're kind of running towards the end. What I'd like to ask everyone to do is, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and type them in. I'm going to give a minute or so for that to happen, and then if there are questions, we'll take the questions. If not, then Joe and I will talk. We'll give a little bit of an outro on kind of leadership success stories that we've seen. What are some ways you've seen that people have applied some of these strategies we've talked about and really turned their organization around or gotten things better within their organization. So again, I'm going to go quiet for about a minute. If you have questions, go ahead and type them into the chat box or raise your hand, and then we'll take it from there. Excellent. All right, let's launch into our outro. Joe, as questions come in, we will take them. So if you're typing in a question, please feel free to go ahead and keep doing that. But Joe, do you want to take a couple minutes now and talk about a successful leadership that you've seen in an organization, somebody you've worked with, or some sort of story that'll inspire us about sales leadership?
Yeah, there are 2 points. One, as I said very early on, is sometimes you learn things negatively. And I did some work with some people where the leader actually presented everything in the negative. They basically told people what they couldn't do. And as a result of that, what ended up happening is they really minimized the available resources within the organization. And to me, it's been one of those learning experiences that stayed with me forever. And that is, what is your leadership style, and how do you communicate? How do you delegate? Do you delegate by saying, okay, Andy, I'm giving you this project that has no numbers in it because I know you're terrible with math. And that's almost the way this person presented things. So understanding how, I'm going to back up and say, the other cliche that I've used a lot from a leadership standpoint is communication is the message heard, not spoken. And when you think about that, it's not about what you're saying, it's about what is being heard and how it's being heard and how it's being delivered. And when I've been able to get people to think about that and adjust and say it's more about the audience that you're delivering it to than you, the messenger, that's when we get breakthrough as leaders and managers. And that would be my sort of comment at this point.
Excellent. Thank you. And the example I like to tell is I've been working with a leader. Again, Joe's focus is more on sales leadership, and my focus is more on kind of CEO leadership, leadership within the organization. And I've been working with a CEO who when I started working with her, all her projects were stalled. It was the kind of thing like, she was just putting her management team in place, and everything was stalled. And what we ended up working on together was how to empower her staff, right? Joe talked about his eight-step, sales process. I actually teach a 4-step delegating process. So, when you look at delegating, when you look at how to build that trust, how to look at to finally let go of these things you've been doing forever and trust someone else that they can do it. So I walk people through a 4-step delegation process. And with her, that looked like taking a look at each project that she had on her plate and working out a way to get it moving again, to give someone something to do, to communicate that, because I agree with Joe that it's all about the communication. Like when you look at delegating, when you look at things that are stalled, it's all that the communication isn't happening as cleanly as it could. And so we worked on these communication skills on doing that. And the really cool thing that's happening now is that people are volunteering for things, right? Stuff comes up in the organization, and I think, Joe, this goes back to something you said a couple of minutes ago, that if you're being negative about things don't get done. And what she's creating now is that she's created an environment where people can bring ideas up, and people can just go do them. I mean, she has stories now every week when we talk of stuff that came up, and someone in her team said, excuse me, said, oh, I can take care of that. That's something that I'd be interested in taking care of. And so it's a really fun process to watch, that as you kind of empower the people that you work with, that good things start happening without you having to work on them. And I actually had a specific example of that. A project that had really been stalled when we first started talking. Her managers are now just doing it on their own, right? I mean, a bunch of stuff was happening on this kind of training program that they had put in place. And it was happening all by herself. Somebody sent her an update, and we realized that she had put something in place that was empowering people to do the work without her being involved, right? And that to me is really the key about this kind of leadership, that you can put things in place, put things in place that empower other people to get things done. And I think that works well, in your sales organization as in any organization, in your organization. Great. So, Joe, did you have any final thoughts you wanted to share with?
No, just when you don't delegate, you usually have a lot of wasted resources in the organization. You have people just sitting there, and it's unused resource.
Well, the managers are running around like crazy. It's so busy.
Yeah, right.
That's
exactly. But no, that's it. Thank you.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank everyone for being on the webinar. Again, please go ahead and fill out the survey when we get off the webinar. We are very interested in your feedback. We appreciate you being here, and we look forward to seeing you in the future. And thank you, Joe. It's been a pleasure having you on the webinar. Really appreciate all your expertise and feedback. And thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you. Good luck.